Cinema is an art form that invites discussion and benefits from it, but in the world of the internet, these discussions are louder and exposes us to a carousel of discourse. And there are a few select subjects that get rotated in and out depending on what project is the hot topic of discussion, and there's very few topics I find more annoying than the runtime discourse. People whining and complaining about movie runtimes and asking, what happened to the 90-minute movie? While they binge a season of television that takes over 10 hours to finish. And since the release of Oppenheimer, I haven't seen too much discourse around its runtime, but also I've chosen not to expose myself to discourse as much anymore, so I have no clue, nor do I care. But I have noticed the uptick of 3-hour movies during the 2020s, especially in 2022. But 3-hour movies have always been a thing, in the same way that 90-minute movies have always been a thing. I think there's pros and cons to both, but ultimately the runtime doesn't make a movie good. It's what happens within that runtime that makes it good. There are 3-hour films that don't have perfect pacing, but I've seen just as many films that are 90 minutes or less that feel like they're trying their hardest to justify every single minute they have. But really, it feels like they didn't have enough material to explore in the first place. Now, Oppenheimer is a film that starts and doesn't stop. It's an extremely dense experience visually, sonically, and in terms of information being doled out. There's always something happening and your brain doesn't have the opportunity to drift off into space. It was perfect for my ADD. My ADD was loving it and it was hating it because when the movie ended, my brain was like throbbing for hours. In a good way though. I did not mind the throbbing. The only moment of respite you get as an audience member is a specific moment during the Trinity test, which I don't want to spoil, but other than that, this thing is moving, and I think I need to see it a couple more times to really express what works and doesn't work about it. And I think being honest about that is valuable because on the internet, where you have to have a take as soon as possible because of the algorithm, sometimes that take is unfounded or it's half-baked and it doesn't provide anything of value. And I think to have very clear thoughts on a film of this scale, of this length, and of this density that goes beyond this part was good and this part was bad is time. Time to digest, time to watch other shit, and time to watch the film over and over. The films that I've seen recently enough that at the time of this recording I can confidently call the Crème de La Crème of 3-hour films are your usual suspects. These films share a similar quality in that even though the pacing of each of these films are radically different, there's something always pushing the audience along and the purpose is never lost on you. When I decide I'm gonna go along for the ride of a 3-hour film, there's usually a moment, a line, or a sequence that is so good it'll keep me seated the entire time. In Titanic, it's the moment when Rose sees the portrait up close for the first time in 84 years. In The Godfather, that moment is... No, but it's actually here, when Kay notices Luca Brasi rehearsing his speech to the Don. Up until this point, we've seen different shades to life in the family at this wedding, but this comedic moment followed by Brasi actually doing the speech in the next scene lightens the experience and you see the humanity in these characters. It also unknowingly disarms future audiences from what could be perceived as a pretentious aura around the film because of its general consensus as one of the greatest films of all time. In Heat, it's obviously just the fact that Al Pacino and Robert De Niro are sharing scenes with each other for the first time in a movie, but you could also attribute it to the robbery gone equal parts right and wrong. But for me, it's the way Al Pacino commands the screen when he's going over the crime scene. There's not a moment here where he's unsure of himself and everyone is following him and hanging on every word he says, and so is the camera, and by proxy, so is the audience. And by the time the scene is over, I'm locked in.
I mean, is this guy something or is he something?
In Magnolia, that's the introduction of Tom Cruise's character, which has this grand presentation, this push-in, that hair, and his character is really despicable, and at least in the beginning, sticks out in comparison to the rest of the ensemble. Paul Thomas Anderson has gone on record saying that he should have cut at least 30 minutes from the film, but sometimes it's okay to be wrong about a movie you made.
I had enough vinegar and confidence and I wasn't really editing myself, and this sort of open wound and all that stuff came out, and I look back proudly at that. And
well, you should.
Yeah.
But if you were given the opportunity to do another cut of it...
Oh, I'd slice that thing down. I'd cut it's way too fucking long.
Good.
Oh, no, it's unmerciful how long it is. It's
Suck my dick! That's what's wrong!
The Wolf of Wall Street literally starts with this, and I'm so in. The rapid, unrelenting pace of the film feels like you're being taken care of because something new is always happening. You're always being introduced to new information, new shots, new characters, and different tones. Another 3-hour epic that shares the same quality but to a much lesser degree is Avengers Endgame. The quality of filmmaking is obviously not the same, but it does have the benefit of having over a dozen movies before it, justifying its existence and its length. It also has that cliffhanger at the end of Infinity War, baiting us into needing a satisfying resolution to this story. But the thing that piqued my interest the most was the title card that jumped us forward 5 years. I think you could have made this first setup heavy hour work without it, but with it, there's so many questions the film has to answer on top of the ones it already has to deal with, and the audience is genuinely interested in those answers. And for the first time in the series, we're allowed to actually live with these characters. Another 3-hour film that also deals with a ton of setup, is constantly asking and answering questions, but is only letting us live with its characters for its entire runtime, is Quentin Tarantino's 8th film, The Hateful Eight. The thing that I find so fascinating about this film is that for me, there isn't a moment that sticks out to me like the other films I've mentioned. Its slow moving methodical pace pulls me in. Its questions that are answered with another question pulls me in further, and the payoffs and resolutions along the way make me want to go on that journey again.
You're starting to see pictures, ain't you?
But what happens when your film doesn't start off on a good note and you have a 3-hour movie ahead of you? Well, The Irishman is an example on how to win me back as an audience member, because it's 3.5 hours and that first hour is rough. It's not because the writing or the pacing or anything like that. It's the fact that these old ass senior citizens are supposed to be playing guys in their early 40s for the first hour. This guy ain't kicking like he's in his 40s. The de-aging doesn't really work that well because their age weighs on them. Whether that's in their face or their posture or their movement, it's kind of hard to miss. But the miraculous thing this film does is that eventually all of that goes away and the wonderful performances shine through, and before I knew it, I realized I was watching a tragedy unfold.
Who's that?
Your attorney, Mr. Regano.
He's dead?
Yeah.
Who did it?
Cancer.
What I want to do now is focus on those recent 3-hour films I mentioned in the beginning that have riddled this decade, and end with how I think filmmakers and audiences should approach films of this size. So we can't start anywhere else than Zack Snyder's Justice League, a film that is 4 hours long and 3 hours and 53 minutes excluding the credits, which is twice as long as Joss Whedon's messy theatrical cut. Zack Snyder's version is a lot more cohesive and gives time for each character to have a proper introduction, and we have a proper amount of time to live with these characters and yearn for the moment when they finally team up. As an overall experience leading up to the climax, it's mostly satisfying, and it's following in the footsteps of similarly long movies about a group who eventually comes together to do the thing in the climax, which I'm not going to talk about, and there's other films like that that have come out recently that I'm also not going to talk about yet. Maybe that'll be its own thing. Maybe there's a part 2 to this 3-hour thing. Anyway, Zack Snyder is not one of my favorite directors, so there are aspects of it that don't jive with me throughout. The most egregiously bad moments, however, are in the 20-minute sequence of endings. Some of them were necessary, and some of them shouldn't have even been in the film. Sure, it's nice to see Martian Manhunter, who is one of my favorite superheroes, but what's the point of acknowledging his presence if he's not going to be involved in the conflict? It's just fluff. Also, that flash forward into the future where we get Jared Leto returning as the Joker was bad on all fronts, and also completely unnecessary.
And make no mistake, I will fucking kill you.
Next is the third highest grossing movie of all time, Avatar: The Way of Water, which is around 3 hours and 3 minutes without the credits. The main problem here is that although much of the runtime feels like we're vibing and living in this world, it feels like part 1 of a multi-part conflict, whereas the first film was this full package and it was 30 minutes shorter. If the goal was to tell a complete story while also leaving it open-ended for the sequels we all know are coming, there's definitely a way to do that is satisfying. Leaving the conflict between between Sully and Quaritch unresolved is fine, I guess, although that wouldn't have been my preference. But they tried to give us an on-screen death that mattered, but they didn't kill off a character who was actually developed over this 3-hour journey. It was kind of pointless. We got some development, we learned more about the characters in the world, but nothing of real consequence ended up happening, which is really frustrating as an audience member and makes it really hard to want to engage with this experience again.
Is that good for fucking sound? Now we are going again!
Babylon without the credits is 3 hours and 50 seconds long. The consensus around Babylon is really mixed, but I loved it. Unfortunately, like the Snyder Cut, like Avatar: The Way of Water, the ending is an issue. For a majority of these 3 hours, Babylon is a fast-moving, purposeful whirlwind of an ensemble piece, and then the end is just way too slow, unsatisfying, and uses a perplexing amount of footage from James Cameron movies. I understand what he was trying to say, but the thing that stayed with me the least are those final moments. It would have been perfectly acceptable to end it on those tragic beats instead of this forced, hopeful montage. I think a big hang-up audiences have about 3-hour films is if they watch films like these which don't have entirely satisfying conclusions, then they're gonna feel like that time they invested was for nothing.
Don't waste my motherfucking time!
But that's not an issue for RRR, which was the sleeper hit of 2022. I'm gonna call this Triple R just for brevity, because saying RRR is like hurting my mouth. Triple R is part historical fiction, part superhero movie, part romance, part buddy cop movie, part war movie. It's a lot. But you can fit all of that in a 3-hour epic, as well as the best dance scene in recent memory. There are sequences throughout that are insane, fun to watch, and are a genuine breath of fresh air compared to Western aesthetics, but in my opinion, the flashbacks could have been paced better because the other sequences were so exhilarating, I felt like I wanted to get back to that as fast as possible. So, although sometimes it's a chore, Triple R is an incredibly satisfying experience. Drive My Car won Best International Feature last year, and this film is a special case because I had a full bladder around 20 or 30 minutes into the film, and I had a full bladder in a theater where the rows were very close to each other. So in the dark, it would have been next to impossible to scoot without making a scene. With that in mind, I decided to prolong this horrible social interaction as much as possible. But then the audition sequence happened, and it was so good, my bladder was like, you know what? We can wait the remaining 2.5 hours, and I sat through the whole thing. But the 3-hour film I've watched the most times is, funnily enough, a film that came out last year, and that's The Batman. I watched it 4 times in theaters, the first 3 being within a day of each other, and I've seen it another 3 to 4 times since. So I've spent almost a day of my life watching The Batman. I think my childhood attachment to the character is a factor in this, so I'm not going to pretend that that's not in the air, but there's so much more to this that keeps me coming back. The usage of perspective shots, the commitment to the shadows, and the fine highlights made it visually stimulating the entire time. Also, the reoccurring motifs with the original score in conjunction with Ave Maria, the Iceberg Lounge, oh my god, the Iceberg Lounge. But the thing that's made it worth it every single time for me is this feeling that when it's all over, I've gone on a journey. I've gone to a place that was entirely manufactured for this experience, and I've lived in someone else's shoes and watched them change and grow. It's incredibly rewarding to watch a film this long that makes you feel this satisfied, so when I go to watch The Batman again, I don't even think about how long it is, I just press play. If I had to nitpick one moment that I think could have been better, it's the hospital scene, which works for me like half the time, and the issue for me is just the shots, because there's only 2 or 3 of them for this very long static scene, but it feels so distant when the scene itself is really intimate, and it would have improved from having different camera placement, whether that's the distance or the frame size or whatever, I don't know. Not up to me, it's not my job, but I think it would have benefited from some sort of change. When filmmakers decide they're going to make a film of this length, I think they need to be even more cognizant of the fact that the audience is automatically going to be adversarial towards it because they're thinking, why is it this long? And every second has to justify that length. And I'm not saying it needs to be only plot focused, and I'm not saying it can't have shots that take their time, but what I am saying is that something needs to always be happening. But what I think audiences could do better on their end is that when they're going to watch a film, they should be looking up how long it is. Some people may think that audiences shouldn't have to do homework before they watch a film. They should be able to just put something on and the film should be strong enough to hold on its own. To a certain extent, that's true, but if you're not emotionally available to take something in, you shouldn't engage with the film you're not ready for, and that goes for the length of films as well. As an audience member, if you know you're going to walk into a 3-hour film, you won't drink a whole big gulp because you know you'll miss part of the movie if you do. Or maybe you won't stay up super late if you know the next morning you have tickets to watch a 3-hour detective movie. Not to mention, we're all really busy, we have a million things going on in our lives, and just as a good piece of life advice, it's always good to keep a schedule. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you agree or disagree, tell us in the comments. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share with your friends. Do all the things. Got a million things coming. Blah, blah, blah. You know the deal. Okay, bye-bye.
What's the matter?
Nothing. You're right.
I'm right. Yeah.